Brooke, and sorry I'm in kind of a new location today. There are people sleeping in the room that I normally do my videos in, so today we're in a little bit of a different place, but hopefully you can see my fish back here. This one is Ringo, named after Ringo Starr, of course, and he has his own yellow submarine in there. This one is Archie, whose full name is Archer Swift Alwyn, and he is of course named after The Archer by Taylor Swift because he just perfectly is the colors of the Taylor Swift Lover cover art and era. So yeah, that's totally how I name my fish. So yesterday I finished my last final exam of my freshman year of college. So I thought I would take this week as an opportunity to talk both on YouTube and on my blog about my freshman year of college. As always, there is a blog post, which I will have linked first thing in the description, where I talk much more in depth about all of this and expound upon so many of these stories. It's probably my longest and both my favorite blog that I've ever written, so please check that one out. On August 15th, 2019, the day came for me to move into my dorm at the University of North Alabama, where I attended my freshman year of college. Both my mom and my grandparents went with me in two separate cars so they could leave me with my car, obviously. And we arrived and there were people everywhere. They had a ton of volunteers that were there and ready to help everyone unpack. Now, the way that the dorm I moved into was set up was on each level there were 3 floors, but on each floor there were 2 sides, and there was the boys' side and the girls' side. You went in the door, you were looking out at kind of a living room area. There was a big like sectional sofa, chairs, a couple of tables, there was a TV on the wall. If you're going in like this, there's a door right here, there's a door right here, and there's a door right here. And I was in the one going that way, and when you walk in, there is kind of an open foyer area and like a little shelf right here, and then right here there is a door to a double room that 2 girls stay in. Then right here there's a door to a single room. Right here is a door to another single room. You kind of turn the corner right here and there is a sink, and 2 sinks actually, and a mirror, and then you have on this wall you have shower, which is behind one door, and the toilet, which is behind another door. So I of course was in the double room, and I was the first person out of the entire suite to move in. And everyone brought the things into my room, and in a huge hurry everyone helped me unpack, and I was getting very stressed out because everyone was talking at one time, and on one hand I was like, okay, like go on, let me, you know, do my stuff. But on the other hand, I was barely holding it together because I was so emotional about them leaving me there. Finally, the time came when they had to leave, and I walked them out, and I just remember I had the biggest lump in my throat the whole time that I walked back to my dorm. And very shortly after I came back, my roommate arrived. Her name is Emma, and she was there with her mom and her aunt and her older sister. And they were the nicest people, but I could just barely even look at them to talk because I was like on the brink of tears the entire time. And they stayed for a while, and I had had my grandfather push my bed up. I didn't have it lifted, but I had it up on the highest setting where like I had to step on a thing to get up on it. After I had finished getting all my stuff decorated and organized, I had just gotten up in the bed and I was actually pretending to be asleep. And I remember they were all standing kind of below my head talking about what they were going to go get for dinner, and I was just sobbing the whole time. And I don't know if they noticed that or not, but I was just like, I straight up am not going to be able to do this. But that night I met up with a girl named Hannah who I had been talking to on Instagram prior to coming to school. She was also an incoming freshman, and she had seen some of the stuff that I had posted about doing for Alissa, and she had heard of the case, and we talked about that, and she was just really nice and really cool. And so I met up with her that night, and me and her and 2 of her other friends go walk around campus, and there was this really strange guy who stopped us for a long time, and was asking us questions about like local restaurants, and we had all moved to Florence that day, so none of us had any idea what he was talking about. I remember we were walking around the campus in the dark. I'm with these people who I had just met today. I'm sitting here clutching my pepper spray because there's this odd man stopping us and talking to us, and I was like, I am so not going to make it here. We went back to Hannah's room, and she lived in the same building I did, but on the floor under me. And there were signs all over the wall in the whole building saying that quiet hours were from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. But this whole group of girls were sitting in her room laughing, and we hear a knock on the door. Campus police! And I look at my phone and it's 10:02, and we're like, oh my gosh, we have broken quiet hour rules. We're gonna be in trouble on the first night we're here. So finally Hannah goes and gets the door, and they inform her that someone has hit her car in the parking deck and she needs to come look at it, which was better than us being in trouble, but it still sucked. And we all went with her to check it out. And we rode in the back of the police car, and he turned the lights on just for us, so I can forever tell the story that I spent my very first night at college in the back of a police car. Let me make it very clear that in these first few weeks I was there, I did not know anything. I could not find anything. I did not know where the dining hall was, and it was directly across when you walked out the front door of my building. That's how bad it was. One day I somehow managed to find the Chick-fil-A, but that was like a miracle. I was constantly stressed because I did not want to ask people where I was going or what to do. And I let that kind of embarrassment and fear keep me from a lot of things. And I'm gonna make a video before school goes back talking about like advice for college freshmen, but I just want to say, like, right now, nobody knows what they're doing, and please don't be afraid to ask people. That is what they're there for. Hannah became one of my really good friends, and I of course have my 2 fish babies here. I had Ringo at the time because I've had him for almost 2 years. I did not have Archie yet. I had another one named Poppy who passed away around the same time. And Hannah bought this little tiny betta fish that was actually marked as a baby boy betta fish named Billy, and we bonded over both having fish, and we even made an Instagram called UNA Beta Moms. The very first week that I was there, we actually didn't start classes yet. It was just an adjustment week, which I really needed. We did all kinds of activities. Like one night all the freshmen had to go out on the practice football field, and we just kind of like played games and introduced ourselves, and it was kind of weird. I was thrilled when I caught back up with Hannah and Emma. I had already spoken to the advisor of the school newspaper, the Florala, before I had come to college, and he had offered me a small scholarship position to be a staff writer, and I was supposed to be going to meet with them. And the very first month at school is called Main Month, and there are all kinds of activities that they plan to do for you to just kind of get acclimated, but it's for people of all ages. It's just kind of like a celebration of school starting back. And there was an event on that calendar called Pizza with the Paper. And it was at the Student Publications building, and I was really excited about going. But I knew for a fact that I had no idea where I was. So I left my room like an hour before this event started, even though it was also on campus. And this is not a big campus in the way that you like have to drive places. Like this entire campus is walking. And I left about an hour early, and I could not find that place at all. Now, in my defense, it is kind of over on the side behind some buildings. It's kind of small. It's kind of almost off of the main area of campus. But for the amount of time and effort I put into trying to find the building, it's quite embarrassing. Eventually, I did find it. So I went to go meet with the advisor in person, and I introduced myself, and he basically said, hey, what do you want to write about? And so I told him music. I love music. I love talking about music. That's definitely what I want to write about. I told him about Alissa and a few other things that I might want to. And he was like, okay, well, I always ask people what their dream job would be, so what would your dream job be? And I said to write for Rolling Stone. He mentioned that the artist John Paul White, who was in the band The Civil Wars, actually from Florence, Alabama, and a UNA alumnus, and asked me if I was interested in doing a profile on him. meaning I would like get to interview him. And I was absolutely blown away by this. I was like, I just walked in and sat down in this man's office and he pretty much was like, hey, here's everything you ever asked for. I actually did not end up getting to do the profile on John Paul White this semester, but like I'm guaranteed that I'm gonna make it happen one day. Thankfully, one of the activities that they had for Main Month was they got tour guides to take you and show you where all of your classes were, and God knew I needed this, and I did that and I felt a little bit better about getting to my classes. Something really big happened to me in these first few weeks I was at college, because I had been working all summer to get crime reporter Nancy Grace to hear Alissa Turney's story, and she finally decided that she was going to cover it on her podcast Crime Stories with Nancy Grace about the week after I moved in. And for some reason they wanted me to be on there as an advocate for the case. So I actually called in and was in a recording of Nancy Grace's podcast, her episode about Alissa. And this was one of the best things that ever happened to me. And I remember, still had no idea where I was, but I went to like McDonald's and sat in the parking lot because I didn't want any of the noise from the dorm to interfere. And so I was starting to look forward to a few more things, but I was still super lonely and super confused. On the day that classes started, the very first class was an English composition class. And I went in and you know, you have to do the whole thing that everyone hates, where you stand up and introduce yourself, say where you're from, say what your major is. And I of course said, hey, I'm Brooke, I'm a journalism major. And there was a guy in the back of the classroom who I'm gonna call Michael for the sake of this video. And he did his thing and he was like, hey, I'm Michael, I'm also a journalism major. And the reason why I'm laughing is because I'm so incredibly cringy. But I literally, when he said he was a journalism major, I turned around and went, like finger guns. So as I began going to these classes more and more, he would kind of talk to me a little bit before class every day. I didn't pay very much attention to him. It took me until like maybe the third time he spoke to me to remember his name. I'm not just saying this to like sound like I was all cool, because I totally wasn't, hence the finger guns. But I just like, that was so not my priority at the moment, but he kept talking to me. And I had other things going on. I had gone to the newspaper office and observed a production meeting for the very first issue of the paper that came out like the first week of school. I had jokingly said, you know, Taylor Swift is coming out with a new album this week and I would be more than happy to review it for you, thinking like that they would definitely not want my fangirling in their paper, but they totally loved the idea and told me to do it. And Love Her coming out was such a big deal for me at this time because it so gave me something to look forward to. And I went and bought the CD and I did a reaction video and I reviewed it, and it was the very first printed article that I ever wrote, and I was very excited about it. It's still one of my favorites. I'm gonna link it below. It's not the best because I have definitely improved in writing since then, but it has a very special place in my heart and it came from the heart and I love it. And I remember going into the production meeting for the issue that my review was in and seeing one of the graphic designers sitting at her computer, and she was working on the graphic for my story, and it was her whole MacBook desktop screen was just a graphic of Taylor Swift for my story. And I was like, what is this? Like, this is what dreams are made of. At some point during Main Month, I went to this big event that they have on campus called The Big Deal. And while standing in a free t-shirt line, I turned around and just randomly started talking to the girl behind me. And her name was Natalie. And me and Natalie hung out for the whole rest of this event. We got each other's phone numbers and we just kind of became friends. And completely coincidentally, she actually ended up meeting and moving in to Hannah's dorm, even though they knew each other from somewhere completely separate. Hannah was not with me at this event. So now I had Hannah and Natalie, who were like my two friends that I had made other than my roommate, who were in my building with me, and it was so much fun. Also, my best friend from high school, or one of my best friends from high school, her name is Lacey Jane. She had come to UNA before I did, the year before, because she was a grade ahead of me, and her being there is kind of the reason that I really looked into the school and I ended up falling in love with it. And so she was there, and she was living off campus in an apartment, and I also reference her a good bit throughout this story. So things were starting to go better. And it was the Friday before Labor Day weekend, and I had gotten to English class pretty early. I was going to get in my car and go straight home after I got out of this class, and I had gotten there early, so I sat down on a bench and someone kind of just like slid in next to me, and it was Michael. And he asked me for my Snapchat, and I was like, hey, I hate Snapchat. What about Instagram? He was like, I already followed you on Instagram. And I was like, you did? And he was right. He had followed me on Instagram, and I honestly thought it was an account that was going to follow me to unfollow me because it had a lot of followers. I drove home successfully. That was the first time I ever driven on an interstate, and I drove on the interstate for like 2.5 hours. I'd literally never set my car on the interstate before, not even with someone else. And I was home for Labor Day weekend, and me and Michael had arranged that we were going to go out when I got back. And I was sad to go home from Labor Day, but I had production night for the newspaper that Monday, and then I had the date. And so I had things to look forward to. So I went to production night, and then I ran back to my room to get ready, and I met him at this bench that was kind of in the middle of campus, or not in the middle of campus, but like in the middle of the residence area. And I had kind of pictured it going like I was going to take my car and he was going to take his car, considering we really didn't know each other. But somehow I found myself just following him into his truck, and I just went with him, which is a terrible idea. He was in no way predatory or creepy or scary. Like, he never did anything that was at all physically threatening to me or even making me uncomfortable in that way. Like, don't get the wrong idea. But just because all people are not like that, please don't do as I did and just get into a stranger's truck. We had a good time. So after that first initial date, we just kind of hung out like all the time, because I was still kind of lonely and getting used to everything, and he was kind of the same way because all freshmen were confused at this time. And we would just pretty much do everything together. We went to class together, we'd go eat lunch, we'd go get coffee, he'd come with me to Target to run my errands. We were having a lot of fun. He was like my best friend for a while, and we, I have several good memories from that time. I would go to his room in the morning and we'd have coffee before class, and on Friday the 13th we went and saw It Chapter 2 in theaters, and we just did fun stuff. But several weeks, maybe about a month in, I found out that he had been lying to me about something pretty serious, and we actually broke up for the first time. I did not realize how attached I was until we had broken up this first time. Because, I mean, this was the first real boyfriend I had ever really had. And I kind of fell apart. And the day after we broke up started homecoming week, and my family was here visiting, and I was actually staying at Lacey's apartment because I was feeding her cats while she was out of town, and I was just absolutely distraught that entire weekend. And I kept checking on him, and finally I gave in and was like, hey, let's talk, and we got back together. Meanwhile, during this time, my social life was actually doing really well. I had a boyfriend, I had Hannah and Natalie and Lacey, and I had all of my friends in the dorm who I met through Hannah and Natalie, and we would play big games of Cards Against Humanity like almost every single night. I had gotten really close to Emma, my roommate. I had friends in pretty much all of my classes, friends with almost everyone who I worked with at the paper, and I was having a really good time. At the time, I went and stayed in Fort Payne, Alabama with Amanda Shirley and her family, and went to a vigil for the Justice for DJ case, which I'll have more info linked about. On the way back then, someone actually hit me on the interstate, but everything was alright. And very shortly after I got back from that trip, me and Michael got into another huge argument, and we broke up for the second time. And this was when I got up the next morning and went to the salon and cut off like a foot of my hair, which was a terrible decision, and I still regret it every single day when I see that my hair is not long like it was at the beginning of the year. Don't get the crisis haircut. But we didn't talk for about 2 weeks in there and it was terrible. And I said, okay, let's talk again. And he came over and he promised me, he was like, everything's gonna be okay. We're not gonna have these same problems. I want to be with you, all of this. And I said, okay, but this is like the last chance. And this lasted 1 day. It was the second day after the night that we had gotten back together. And we had walked back with each other from English class. And we had stopped and sat down at that same bench where we met to go on the first date, and we were just talking. And my friend Lindsay, who sat by me in the same English class, walked by. And I called her over, I was like, hey, and I asked her a question. And Lindsay just kind of like invited herself and sat down with us and started talking. And they were talking about all this stuff about partying and drinking and doing drugs that I could not relate to in any way because I had never been a part of the whole party scene. And they were talking about in high school how they had done all this stuff, and I was like low-key kind of left out of the conversation. And I hated the way that he was just looking at her in general. I was getting really anxious, but I was like, look, y'all have broken up twice, you have to stop getting anxious over stupid stuff. So I was like, whatever, it's fine. And I sat there. And she ended up staying there for over an hour, and I actually ended up having to get up to go to my next class. And when I got up to go to my next class, I really thought that they would be like, okay, bye, and they would, you know, go their separate ways, but they didn't. They stayed there after I went to my next class, and I had such a bad feeling about it, and I was correct, because this was the last time I ever had a face-to-face conversation or interaction with him at all. So when I got out of my class, I called him and he didn't answer, and he texted me that he was doing homework and that his roommate was in the room taking a nap. He would call me later. I had plans to go to dinner just to get food at the dining hall together that night. And dinner time came and it passed, and he was not answering my text messages and I hadn't heard from him, and the dining hall was about to close because it closed at 8 and I needed to get something to eat because that was the main place to eat on campus. And so I went ahead and went and ate by myself. And on the way out of the dining hall, I called him and a girl picked up the phone. And I said, hello? And she said, hello? And I said, who is this? And she said, this is Kenzie. And I said, okay, Kenzie, where's Michael? And she hung up the phone. Now, he had this window that he always had open looking out from his room. And whenever I would walk by, coming back from class or whatever, if I could see he was in the room, I would always like yell up at him and like wave at him through the window. It had been a thing for a long time. So instinctively, I just turned around and I went straight to where the window was. And I could see him standing, like his silhouette in the room, and I could tell he was talking to someone. And I figured that when he was done talking, he would, you know, come over and say something to me. He did come over there. But he looked right at me, I mean stared at me in the eye, and then closed the blinds and closed the window. And this absolutely broke my heart. It was terrible. It was the most humiliating thing that has ever happened to me. I ran back to the dorms. I had called Natalie on the way and I was like, hey, I'm coming, and I was crying. And she met me at the door and hugged me and like brought me to her room and apologized to all the other people who were sitting in the lobby who were very confused and very concerned. And like, she was just such a true friend to me that day, because like she sat in the floor and held me and helped me breathe and like literally like held a bag in front of me because I was crying so hard I thought I was gonna throw up. And like, that's a true friend right there. After this happened, you know, it didn't sound like it was Lindsay on the phone. I figured that it probably was, but it also didn't sound like her. So I kind of gave her the benefit of the doubt, because this girl is my friend. Like, I've been friends with her almost all year, right? And I had just introduced her to Michael this day. And so I texted her and I was like, do you know who Kenzie is? And she was like, no. And I'm like, well, are you the one who answered the phone? And she was like, no, if it was me, you would have recognized my voice, and it wasn't me, and just, I don't even know what you're talking about, and got like super, super defensive. And it seemed like she already knew what I was talking about without me even explaining it to her, which is like... And then over the next few weeks, she would just send me these harassing messages on Instagram, and I, for whatever reason, was scared to block her because I still had to see them in class every single day. And I pretty much stopped going to that class. I did finish the class, but I would never stay the entire time because I sat next to her in class, and every time I would come in, they would come in talking to each other and laughing, and it just drove me crazy. Around this time, I got a job at Subway. I had my first story on the front cover of the newspaper, and I spent a lot of time hanging out with Lacey. Her house or her apartment was just kind of like a safe place for me. We would talk and pray about things, and we would eat and watch movies, and it was always just a really nice place to go. About 3 weeks after the girl picking up the phone slamming the window situation, I was working at Subway, and my friend named Josh texted me, and I knew Josh before this. We had been friends since the beginning of the year, but I've intentionally actually left this part out of the story, and he wasn't super significant in the story so before this, so I wasn't leaving out big parts of the story. But at some point I hope to get him to do a video with me of us telling that part of the story, because it's actually really interesting and I didn't want to tell the whole thing in this video. But he texted me and he was just like, hey, are you going to the football game tonight or tomorrow night? I forgot when it was. And I said, no, I have to work. And so many of my friends had been giving me a hard time saying like, oh, you just need to go out with somebody else, like you're gonna get over it, and I really didn't want to do that. And it wasn't that I was using him as someone to go out with, but I was thinking, hey, me and him are friends, I've always wanted to be closer to him, so if I go out with him to do this, first of all, it'll be someone I can hang out with, and then I can say, hey, I hung out with this guy, and everyone will leave me alone. So I had a concert, a local concert I was going to the next night that I was reviewing for the paper. And I was like, hey, do you want to come with me to this? And he said yes. Sarah had told me, she was like, do not talk about Michael while you were out with this boy. And it wasn't even like a date, really. It was just like we were hanging out. And then he asked me if I had had a, quote, freshman fling, and I was like, what's a freshman fling? And he was like, you know, it's the relationship you get in when you first go to college because you're lonely and you're excited about being in college, but then you mess everything up because you're freshman. And I felt attacked. And so I ended up telling him the entire story. And yeah, we went out that night and we had fun. And he kept inviting me to do things. Some of the stuff I wouldn't do, some of the stuff I would. We started hanging out more. We started watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine together, and that became our show. And we were just hanging out, and it became evident pretty quickly that he did have feelings for me, but I was in no way ready to like actually be dating anyone else because I was so upset and still very hung up on this other situation. And I told him that, and I was really honest with him about it because I knew that he was such a good person, and I did not, even if it was accidental, I didn't want to end up hurting him in that other situation because I was still very upset over that. So I was like, hey, I'm totally not ready for this. And he was like, okay, well, when you are, I'm here, and for now we're just friends. And yeah, we did a lot of stuff together. In mid-November, it was my friend Hannah's birthday, and me and Natalie planned the best, not a surprise party for her ever. It was originally a surprise party, but then she was gonna go out of town those days, and we ended up having to tell her, but it was so much fun. We made a cake, and we also bought a cake, and we got food, and we decorated, and we had all of her friends that we could get to come from campus to come, and we had so much fun. Some of his family is from my hometown, which is part of the story about how we met, and he asked me if I would drive him his family's house, which was just about like 10 miles from where my mom lives, for Thanksgiving. And I said, of course. And a few days before we left to go on the Thanksgiving road trip, I got the news that I had been promoted with the newspaper to news editor. And as soon as I found out, I called Josh, and we had already planned to go to the dining hall together that night because we were going to check out. They said that they were cooking Thanksgiving dinner at the dining hall, which was probably going to be awful, but we wanted to check it out and see what it was. He was like, no, like, you're not eating dinner at the dining hall after you got that big of news, like, we're going to go out. And he actually took me out to eat as a celebratory, not a date dinner, and it was honestly one of the nicest things anyone's ever done for me. So he made the road trip home with me for Thanksgiving, which was like 4 hours, and we had a lot of time to like talk and bond then. And I actually friend zoned him like really hard on this trip, but I actually was like starting to kind of feel things by that point, but I knew that I still really cared about Michael and once again did not want to hurt him, so I wouldn't even admit to myself that I liked. When we came back from Thanksgiving, we were still hanging out, and I was determined at this point. It had been 2 months since the thing with Michael had happened, and I was like, I really need to get over this. Like, it's time to stop being upset over this all the time. And it wasn't even that I needed to be over it so that I would start dating someone else. I just needed to get over the situation. And so I actually wrote Michael this letter, and I just pretty much said everything I wanted to say. And I left it in his truck, or like under the windshield wiper of his truck, so he'd see it when he got in the car. And I don't know what it was about that, but that made me feel so much better, because we had just had such a lack of closure with the whole window slamming thing and the way that that went down, that I just felt like I never got to express what I needed to say. And I was honestly scared to say anything after that happened, because the girl was messaging me on Instagram saying, don't you dare say anything bad about him. So I finally kind of got that out, and I mean, within days I felt so much better. And Josh, it was getting close to exam time, and Josh had invited me to go with him to this Christmas party, and of course I said yes, and me and Natalie went out, and I bought a new dress, and she helped me plan how I was going to do my hair and makeup. Me and Natalie, we also made a huge mission of decorating my dorm for Christmas around this time, and we bought all of the cheap decorations we could find and like completely decked the halls in my dorm. A lot of fun doing that. But finally the day came, and me and Josh went to this Christmas party, and it was snowing, and it was the first time that it had snowed up there, and it snows in North Alabama a little bit more than it does in the part where I'm from. And so we had kind of been expecting it, but we didn't know it was going to snow that night, and it was snowing. And we went to this party, and we were both super dressed up, and we just had such a good time. And after that, we went to a park and we walked around, and the Christmas lights were all on, and it was snowing, and it was just like something out of a movie, and I was just like, ugh. He was leaving the very next day to go home for Christmas break, and I wasn't going to see him for like an entire month. So I didn't say anything. He went home, and I stayed in Florence working, and I probably drove back and forth from Florence to my hometown 5 times over Christmas break, because I was working, but my birthday is the week before Christmas, and then there's Christmas, and then there's New Year's, and I was always driving back and forth. I ended up getting a speeding ticket on Christmas Eve. And when I was coming back from my birthday, he talked to me on the phone for like the whole 4-hour drive. I got there that night. I had called him to like let him know that I had got here safely, and we were talking, and it was in that phone call that we pretty much were like, yeah, or I pretty much was like, yeah, so like when we get back, we're gonna like be together, right? And he was like, yeah, if that's what you want. And yeah, so we were together from then on out, and Christmas passed, and my birthday passed, and New Year's passed, and he actually came back kind of early on New Year's Day, actually. And on January 2nd of 2020, we went back to school, and it started what was some of the best time of my whole life. We were having so much fun, and we were just so close, and we clicked so well, and I didn't understand why I had given so much time and energy and thought and emotion to the Michael situation when I was now with someone who was treating me really well, who had waited for me to get over the other situation for over 2 months, and he was just my best friend, and it was so good. We started our winter semester classes, and we took math class together, But one day we were in class, we'd probably been back at school for about 3 weeks, and he was texting me during class, which we always did, and he was like, hey, I think I have a problem. And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, the university is emailing me that I owe them all this money. And I was like, there's no way that can be right. So we went to the business office. They wouldn't wait on him to get a loan, and they wouldn't let him start a payment plan. And there was just absolutely no logical way that he could get that much money by the next day. So he ended up making the really difficult decision to go home and work for the rest of the semester. So he had to leave, and he moved like 400 miles in like 7 hours away from where I was going to school, and it was terrible. The night before he had to leave, we just never went to sleep. We just literally stayed up the entire night because we didn't know that that was the last day we had left. Around the time that Josh left, I was staying with him the day that he found out, and we were trying to get things worked out for him to get the money, which ended up not happening. But I called work and I was like, hey, I'm having a huge personal situation that I have to deal with. I'm not gonna be able to come in today. And let me tell you, I had never once in my life called in sick to this job. And they were like, well, if you're not gonna come in, then you're just not gonna have a job. I was like, okay. And I didn't go in. About a week after he left, I started plotting with his mother, and I went down there. I went all the way down there one Friday after school and surprised him, and it was so much fun. We had the best weekend. I came back and I felt better after that, and I already had the next trip down there planned. And in these weeks after he left, I was just starting my position as a news editor for the paper, and I was really struggling trying to work with the software we were using, but I was kind of starting to get a hang of it. And I kind of had isolated myself a little bit at this time, and there had been rifts in some of my friendships, but that was kind of starting to get back to normal. I was going to church with this group that he introduced me to, that this couple named Chad and Allison did, and they basically just welcomed people into their home, and you ate dinner and you prayed, and we, talked about God, and they did really good worship music. And I had started going there, and that was really comforting for me. I was struggling to make myself go to class because I was upset most of the time, but I did. And I was enjoying the classes I was taking for the most part, except for math. Me and Lacey hung out a lot. Once again, I was always back at her apartment, which was kind of my safe haven. And we hung out a lot. We had the best Galentine's Day ever on February 13th. Just when everything was looking up, we were making a lot of adjustments at the paper for next semester, and I had kind of gotten back close with my friends, and I was starting to have a good time again, kind of. I still obviously miss Josh a lot, but I was starting to, recover from that situation. And then the coronavirus hit. One day we were saying like, oh, these people are totally over exaggerating, and then we were saying, why are we the only school in the state that hasn't closed? And then before I knew it, I had packed everything up and moved back here at the beginning of March, and then began almost 2 months of online classes in quarantine, which I hated. I hate online classes, and I'm so glad that I have that over with now, but I did make it through. So yeah, that is the story of my year. It kind of just ends abruptly, I know, but that's how it happened for me. It just is one day everything was going all right, and then there was no more school. I talked about kind of some serious stuff. Once again, I did change people's names, but I am thankful for everyone who I met and had any kind of interaction with, even if it was negative, over the course of this year, because I learned so much, and I am so much more mature and capable of handling life issues now than I was before I went to college. And I am thankful for everything that happened, because they, put me on the path that I'm on now, which I feel is really good. I am now with someone who I'm totally in love with, and I am doing my blog and YouTube, and next semester we just announced that we're going back to school regularly. There aren't going to be any more like online classes, because it had been a question of whether or not we were going to do like hybrid classes, like some in person, some online, but the university as of right now plans to completely reopen in the fall, and I have been given the position of arts and entertainment editor for the paper, which I've always wanted, and I'm really excited to make that section better and just bring in all these ideas that I've had for a long time. Josh should be coming back in the fall as well, and things are looking up from here. And even though a lot of crazy things happened that year, I had a lot of fun times too, and I made a lot of good friends and a lot of good connections, and I really love where I am right now. Thank you so much for watching. I know this was kind of a long one. In the description I will have linked, of course, the blog post in which I go into even way more detail than I did in the video. I will have links to all of my social media, my Twitter, Instagram, Facebook page, and I will link my other recent videos and blog posts for you to check out. Make sure you check out the Justice for Alissa stuff that I'm linking. And yeah, if you made it through this semester, I'm proud of you, because I know it was not easy for anyone, and I'm so glad that I, as well as many others, are on the other side of that now. And yeah, I will see you guys later. Bye.